Whether you've been leading for a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, or a few decades, I guarantee you that you had an idea of what leadership was like, and then you got into it, and it was completely different. People didn't tell you about this thing. Now, the truth is, when you get into leadership for the first time, you have an idea of what it's going to be about. You think about the office or the salary or the fact that you'll have direct reports, or you get to finally get out from under someone else's thumb and you get to build what you want to build, or you get to lead the team that you want to lead, or you get to do the things that you want to do. And you think about all the things, and you know it's not going to be as easy as you think it's going to be. But here's the thing that oftentimes gets you. Here's the thing that you often miss, and you're experiencing it right now, or you've learned how to deal with it. It's this idea of isolation, the idea of loneliness that comes with leadership, the loneliness of being in charge. That's something that oftentimes never gets talked about. Not when you get a degree, not when you're sitting underneath someone, not when you're about to get into leadership, and when you're in the seat, oftentimes you feel it in a real profound way. We're going to talk about that today. Now, the thing is, you're not the only one that's ever experienced this. This is a widespread phenomenon within leadership circles all over the globe, from Costa Rica to Croatia, from Uganda to Ukraine. Leaders all over the world have dealt with it, and within branches worldwide, we talk about this on a regular basis, how to handle this. The truth is, for you and for me, we're not the only ones that have ever dealt with this. In fact, one of the best leaders I've ever heard of, one of the best leaders I've ever followed, dealt with this acutely. One of my favorite stories is from a guy named John Maxwell. Now, some of you might be familiar with John. Some of you might not be familiar with John, but he's known around the world as the foremost leadership expert, written over 90 books over the course of 40 years. Absolutely incredible leader, inspired me, inspired a lot of people. But here's the thing about John. Years before he became who people know him to be, he was just starting out in leadership. And he got a really fast start. One of the things that happened to him early on was that he was a pastor, and he was the youngest person to lead a church in his denomination past the 1,000 person mark. No one else had ever done that. He was one of the first people to change the name of the church within the denomination, which, if you're familiar with Christianity and old school denominations, changing the name is a big freaking deal. He was one of the first and the youngest to do it. He had milestone after milestone, first one to write a book, first one to start speaking on different stages. He had all these milestones as a very young leader. And one of the things that he found was that he expected, get this expectation gap, he expected the more that he accomplished, the more applause he would get, the more people wanted to seek his advice, figure out why he was doing it so well, figure out what the secret sauce was. He expected to get applause as he continued to grow as a leader. But what he found wasn't applause. What he found was isolation. In fact, the better he got as a leader, the more isolated and lonely he felt. In fact, he says very specifically, the better I got as a leader, the more I succeeded, the fewer people celebrated. That was shocking for him because he thought that leadership, specifically high-level leadership, wouldn't automatically lead to disconnection. He didn't think that leadership would lead to isolation, but yet that's where he found himself. What's interesting about that is that that's not just John's story. That's the story of countless leaders. In fact, I dare you to find one leader that hasn't risen quickly in the ranks and experienced deep isolation. It's a shocking and surprising thing. Now, here's the good news. It doesn't have to be the end of the story. It doesn't mean that that's automatic. It doesn't mean that it has to be exactly how it is, but it is something that almost every single leader has felt at one point or another. Deep, real isolation. Oftentimes, loneliness. Now, when you're thinking about isolation and leadership, here's the first thing you got to understand. You got to understand why power reduces honest feedback. It's not you. It's not your personality. It's not the fact that, people are looking at you, and they don't like you as a person. They don't want to hang out with you. It's not that. It's your position. Power by itself reduces honest feedback. One of my favorite studies from 1972 talks specifically about how subordinates in the workplace tend to lose their sense of free will when they start interacting with their boss. Their feeling of just being around them means that they don't have the freedom to just laugh at the joke because it's funny. Now they have to laugh at the joke because he's the boss, because she's the boss. And if you don't laugh at the joke, there are some real consequences. Things might actually not go your way if you don't think everything they say is funny, if you deal with them like you would a normal friend. And so what you do then is you start to couch your words. You start to change your behavior. You start to perform every time you're around them. If you're a leader and you started to realize that people around you are acting a little bit different, they're laughing a little bit too hard at your jokes. They nod a little bit too hard whenever you're making a point. They write notes down because you're talking and they think that, it's amazing when you know in yourself it's actually not that great. You're experiencing the beginnings of isolation, where people are starting to change their behavior around you, not because of you, but because of the position that you're in. So isolation has a lot of negative effects on you as a leader. And oftentimes it happens subtly. It happens in ways that you don't fully understand until it's way too late. John Maxwell was fortunate because he felt it and saw it almost right away. But a lot of people, they're isolated and they don't even know it. They're so focused on their power and authority as a leader, they don't realize that everybody is behaving a little bit differently around them. And a lot of things start to happen over time that if you're not careful, you won't even notice. One of the first things that happens is power reduces honest feedback. So one of my favorite stories, you're going to love this, is of this emperor who gets new clothes. Now, you've probably heard this story before if you're old, but if you're not, you've probably never heard it. I want to tell it to you because it has a lot to do with what happens with people when they get in proximity to power and they start to change the feedback they give to the person in charge. The story of the emperor's new clothes is about this emperor who had all kinds of power in the community and all kinds of power in the kingdom. And people obviously treated him differently, but he didn't know it. One day, two swindlers show up in the kingdom, and they're basically acting like they've got the best fabric that's ever been made. It's made from exquisite animals really, really far away, and no one's ever seen the animals before, but it's the best ever. They talk to the emperor and they convince him that this fabric is the best ever, and they're going to make an amazing new garment for him based on the fabric. And so they go ahead and they pull out the fabric. All the while, there's actually nothing there, but they're acting like they're pulling out this amazing fabric, and they say, well, the truth is only people who are wise and who are smart and who are powerful can actually see this beautiful fabric. Well, the king, and he looked around and he's like, man, I don't want to look like an idiot. Of course I can see the fabric. It's so beautiful. So they're pulling it out. And they're like, oh my gosh. And they drop it and they pick it back up. And they're really making a big show out of it. Like, we're going to make you the greatest outfit that anyone has ever seen. It's absolutely incredible. And so they take the king and they make the outfit. And then they come back and they sort of put it on the king. First, they take all his clothes off. He's completely naked now. And they slowly put on the fabric. And they're like, this is so light. It's almost like you don't feel anything. But yet it is so beautiful. They're like, this is amazing. So they put it on and he goes in front of the mirror and he's completely naked. But he doesn't want to make it look like he doesn't understand because, shoot, only people who are super smart, super powerful can actually see this clothing. And so, people will come in like his servants and he's like, isn't this amazing? And again, his servants, they're pulling their punches. They're not telling him the truth. And so they're like, yeah, king, it is amazing. Because the king said, hey, only people who are smart and powerful, they're the ones who can see this. So they're like, oh, I don't want to look stupid either. So they're like, this looks so incredible. So then the king says, you know what? We've got a major parade coming up tomorrow. I'm going to wear this outfit. And he pays those guys a bunch of money. Those guys grab the money and they leave town. They're never coming back. So the king wakes up in the morning and he goes to where the outfit is laying and he puts it on because it's so light. You can't even feel it, right? And then he goes out in the parade. The whole kingdom is there watching the king walk down the aisle. And he's walking down the street and he's strutting his stuff, making it look like he's wearing this amazing outfit. All the while, everyone's looking around like, oh my gosh. But the truth is, nobody wants to tell him that he's wearing nothing. And so everyone's like, wow, this is amazing, so beautiful, you are so good looking. And they're applauding. And the king is like, this must be true. This is absolutely amazing. I do look great, and I am smart, and I am powerful. Everything that he believed about himself is being reinforced by all the people around him, except for one. There's a little boy sitting behind his mom, and he peeks out from behind his mom's skirt, and he looks at the king. Then he looks at everybody else, and he hears the cheers and the excitement. And then there's a moment when the king starts to move past, and things get a little quiet, and the boy steps out from his mom, and he points directly at the king, and he's like, Mom, the emperor has no clothes on. And that's the moment that everybody snaps and realizes it's all been a lie. and people start laughing. The king is terrified. He's absolutely embarrassed. He runs back into the kingdom and he slams the door. He doesn't come out for years. Now, this is a story, but it's an illustration of what happens when people get to a position where everybody around them stops telling them the truth. This is what we mean by isolation. The further you get up in leadership, the harder it is to get people to tell you the truth. And it's something that you wouldn't realize until you got into the seat and realized it right away that people are pulling their punches. This has happened to me multiple times. When I'm leading something that I thought was very, very important and I go to try to get feedback from people, I realize that it's very, very hard to get feedback from people who aren't your peers, because oftentimes they feel something inside about giving you negative information. So they pull their punches and they don't tell you the full truth. It's not their fault. Because I've been in situations before, people have asked me questions who are supervising me, and man, it is hard to tell the truth. But it's a reality of leadership.